Hello and welcome to today's webinar with Exercise, etc. We're going to be covering secrets of strength and conditioning. Really excited to go over this topic with you today. Over the next couple hours, we're going to really talk about some things in terms of program design and how you can really separate yourself from other trainers with how you design programs for your clients based on all the variables that we can consider when looking at program design. So really excited to get into this topic with you today. Before we get too far, I just want to let you know who you're going to be listening to over the next couple hours. My name is Mike Diebler. Just in case you haven't taken a course with me before, I wanted to let you know a little bit about my background so you know a little bit more about me. I was a former All-American track and field athlete at the University of Connecticut, where I received my bachelor's degree in kinesiology. From there, I went on to the University of Florida to get my master's degree in exercise and sports science. And that's really when I first started getting into the fitness industry and getting certified as a personal trainer. And really just starting my education after my school finished with everything I could with fitness and going through a number of different certifications, including I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist, as well as many other certifications that I've earned over the years. I currently own a private personal training studio in San Diego. I am the owner, operator. I also am still a trainer. I do love working with clients. So everything that we're going to be talking about, this is practical, hands-on stuff that I'm doing every week, as well as teaching with our staff to make sure that they are designing the best programs they can for their clients. On top of owning the training studio, I am the director of education with Exercise, etc. So you may have seen me or heard me on another webinar or seen me at one of the live events. And I also do teaching at a community college out in San Diego at Miramar College. I teach exercise physiology, and also I do some contract work with as a subject matter expert with other organizations such as American Council on Exercise and things like that. So pretty broad range of experience, and I'm really excited to get through this topic with you today. So you are taking this webinar to complete some CECs, not just for the information, and we want to make sure that you understand exactly how you're going to get them. So just in case you haven't taken a course with us before, here's what you're going to do. You are going to view the complete webinar. So once you go through the entire course, you're going to log on to our website at www.exerciseetc.com. At the top right of the screen, you're going to see the administration tab. Click on Webinar on Demand Certificates, and then you'll just select the class that you took. Now just make sure you pick the exact class because some of these titles are similar, but there will be a quiz, a 20-question quiz, so you want to make sure that you do pick the right one so you're taking the right quiz. You will, if you're not sure, you can check your receipt to make sure that you have the right course. After your quiz, you're going to complete a brief evaluation. Let us know what you thought of the course and how we did. And then you will fill in the required fields and get your certificate. It's going to be emailed to you instantly, so you can print it out, save it, and submit it however you need to. Do want to make sure that you get that credit, so please don't wait. Remember to complete this webinar and print the certificate by December 31st of the same year in which you've ordered it. If you wait too long, there's a chance that it won't be accepted. So we just want to make sure that you take care of that. Watch the webinar, take the quiz, get your CCs so you can submit them in a timely manner. And I did mention there is going to be a quiz. The webinar quiz is going to follow the outline that you received with the slides. So it's going to be on the printed material. Obviously, there's going to be crossover, but you're going to follow the quiz based on that printed material, not just the lecture. Okay, so let's get into this topic. This is a couple terms that I want to make sure we start with: workouts versus programs. Now, as I said, I'm hoping that you take the information, apply it, because I really think this separates from, the average trainer to the great trainer. is when you understand this idea of workouts versus programs. So workouts can be found anywhere, right? It's workouts and random exercises kind of put together, no real purpose behind each one. Maybe the theme you find in a magazine, but really it's just a bunch of exercises put together with no big picture. And this can be found anywhere. So clients can go online and go on YouTube, read a magazine, go on blogs, websites, and find thousands and thousands of workouts out there. And a lot of them do. A lot of people do that. They'll just, get a magazine and follow some random program that they or workout that they see on there, and just stick with that for a while. Some might get some results, some might not. But we want to make sure we are separating ourselves from just being able to go to some random website and download a workout. We create programs which have much more purpose behind them. So these are planned out. They consists of workouts, but they're planned out based on specific goals, based on abilities, and based on how much time you have. So you might have a client that says, hey, I need to reach a goal in 8 weeks or 2 years, right? So your program will vary based on a lot of these different variables. And this is what I think, like I said, will really separate you and show value in your expertise. This is why they're going to hire you. It's not just to kick their butt. It's not just to get them sweating. All of those are part of it, right? Some clients like that. They like to go through a tough workout and really sweat and feel sore, and that's great. But we don't want the workouts to be just to get you tired, and that's it, right? There's a lot of ways we can get you tired. You can go do chores around the house and get tired. But we're working out for a specific reason. So we need to understand, what are your clients' goals? Where are they right now? And our program is going to be designed to take you from where you are now to your goals. And we're going to take a lot of things to consider. So that's what I want to talk about today, is really break down, how do we write programs? How do we make it as easy as possible for you to write this up, so we have clients that are getting to their goals and making really you look like a rock star because you were able to solve a problem for them, not with just a bunch of random workouts, but with very specific changes in their workouts, and program it out so they see those changes where they knew exactly where they started and now they're wherever they wanted to be. So that's going to be our goal. So you may have heard of this quote by Harrington Emerson: methods are many, principles are few, and the quote's actually a lot longer than that, but that's the basic idea behind this. And there's a lot of confusion in the fitness and nutrition industries. There's just so much information out there, and just think, when you see all the different ways you can work out and the different tools you can use, and all this information that's thrown in our face, and this is what we do. Imagine how confusing it's going to be for somebody who doesn't work in the fitness industry. They're going to just see all these different things and just be overwhelmed and not sure what to do. And as a trainer, it's hard ourselves sometimes not to be overwhelmed, because new things are coming out all the time, and some fad or trend or new research or whatever it might be. So there's all these different things that are thrown at us, and we need to decide, is this worth looking into a little bit more, or is this something that we can just assume is going to be another fad and trend and not going to catch on, and not going to be worth the effort to really learn more about it. So that's what we have to do. We need to be able to filter all these different things. Now, when you understand this quote, though, methods are many, principles are few, it really tells you that there's a lot of different ways you can implement these principles. But it's the principles we want to make sure that we're sticking to, right? There's only a few principles that we're going to follow in order for a strength and conditioning program to be effective. And if we follow those principles, how you implement them can vary, right? And it's just like a diet plan. You might know somebody who did really well on a paleo diet or a keto diet or a low carb diet or whatever it might have been. It's not always a right, wrong thing. It's just, what were the principles? If they're trying to lose weight, they were in a caloric deficit, and regardless of the diet plan they followed, since they were in that caloric deficit, they did well. So maybe following a specific diet for them, it was easier to do, right? When you cut carbs out, it's easier to eat less, and maybe that worked for that person in particular. But it doesn't work for everybody. But if we understand the principles, now we can start playing around with the methods. So as we see all the different types of workouts, all the training systems out there, we need to understand what principles are they following, and are they even following these principles, or are they just some random stuff thrown together? But once you understand these principles, you can start to manipulate your own programs and I don't know, make your job a lot easier and hopefully less confusing. So that's really what I hope you get by the end of this workshop, is just clarity on what to pay attention to, what you should consider when designing a program for somebody, and when you can kind of ignore the latest fad or whatever it might be. So let's talk about these principles. So there are more than what you see here, but I think these are 4 big ones that we want to talk about. So we'll break each one down in a little bit more specifics. But this is what you need to consider when you're writing a program for somebody. So overload. This is probably the most important thing right here. If there's no overload, then there's no reason for your body to change, to adapt. So that has to be the first part of it. And we'll go into it a little bit more. And then looking at specificity, we're going to talk about the SAID principle here. Basically just saying we need specific adaptation, or I'm sorry, we need to train the body specific ways to get the desired results that we want. Just randomly doing stuff, you might get lucky and they see the results they're looking for, but it's not going to guarantee that we get the results that we want. And that's what we want. I want to know if I train a specific way, I get a specific result. And that's the principle of specificity. Reversibility is the idea that all of the hard work that we're putting in will not just stay on its own. Our body is going to be as efficient as possible, and if it doesn't need something, it's going to get rid of it. So if you're doing a lot of weight training, trying to build strength, build muscle size, and then you just stop, you're going to lose your strength, you're going to lose your muscle mass, because your body doesn't need to do that anymore, and it's going to start to get rid of all those gains that you've worked so hard for. And then progression. So there are lots of different ways to progress, so we'll talk about that, but we overload the body so much to get a change, but then we need to progress. And it's not just more weight. A lot of times that's what people think. Well, I was doing 10 pounds last week, now I'm going to do 15 pounds. That is a way you can progress, but there's so many other ways that we can work on progression as well, so we'll talk about some of those. Okay, so let's talk about overload. Now, the picture we see here is the famous story of Milo, the wrestler, who it's been told that every day he took a calf and carried it around and climbed it up a mountain. And as the calf grew into a bull, because he kept doing it every day, he adapted to that challenge that was being placed on his body, and he got stronger and stronger. So it was such a gradual change that he was able to carry a full bull around. So whether the story is true or not, I don't know, but it definitely explains this idea of overload. And as I mentioned, this is probably the #1 principle governing all exercise training. We need sufficient overload to get the adaptation that we're looking for. Now, overload can be different things. It can be more weight, it could be more endurance. There's things we can change, but there has to be a strain on the body. If there is no strain, so if we have insufficient overload, then we will not have an adaptation. So this is, if somebody's doing 10-pound bicep curls with dumbbells, and they've been doing that for a little while and it's no longer a challenge, they're only going to get so much out of that. We can't get any more benefit from or adaptation from that exercise because it's no longer a sufficient overload. And just like most things, more is not always better. There is excessive overload sometimes, and this will lead to injuries or overtraining or both. So we need just that right amount. So what our job is to find out what our clients' limits are. We need to load that limit and maybe slightly push them a little bit further, so that no longer seems to be a strain anymore and they adapt, now we can progress, which we'll talk about later, and continue those adaptations. But we have to do this in a smart manner, because if we just keep loading somebody and pushing them harder and harder and harder, it's only a matter of time before we've added too much stress to the system, and now we've reached overtraining syndrome, and or potential injury as well. So with the idea of overtraining, with overload being an important aspect of this, we have to be aware of some signs of overtraining. So an effective program understands that there's a balance between intense training and rest. So we don't want to go easy all the time. We don't want to go hard all the time. We need those peaks and valleys. We need to push it, then we need to back off so we can allow the adaptation to occur, and then we push again, we back off, and back and forth. Now this is easy in concept, but hard for people to grasp, because more is better, or at least that's what so many people think, is I just need to keep pushing. If I don't, I'm going to lose everything, and we'll talk about reversibility in a minute. So we get this almost addictive quality from exercise. Exercise feels good for many. They enjoy it. We know when you exercise that something's going on in the brain. Those pleasure centers are starting to release endorphins, where we might get that dopamine hit where it feels good. We get pleasure out of exercising. Not always in the moment. Sometimes it's a real struggle and a challenge, but when you're done, we get that great feeling of accomplishment and again, just that dopamine hit, and that could lead to potential addictive qualities where people have to work out. They can't take a day off. They feel like everything's going to fall apart if they don't do it. And a lot of times fitness professionals fall in this category because we love this so much that we just kind of can't get enough of it. So, but we have to be careful, because that can lead to some big problems. So we have to remind our clients that exercise is stress. It's a good stress, but it can turn bad. So again, more is not always better. We stress the body, and then we allow it to recover, because that's where the adaptation occurs. So if there's no recovery, there is no adaptation. So you're constantly just pushing yourself into the ground, digging the hole deeper and deeper, and you're never really seeing the benefits from exercise. And again, this is that whole idea of, are you working out to get results, or are you working out to just sweat and be sore and get tired, right? So we have to really break that down and ask ourselves honestly, what are we looking to get out of this? So if we have somebody that is constantly pushing, we can look for some things, look for some signs. Sometimes it's too late. They've already, hit an overtrained status, and we need to back off and allow them to properly recover. So some signs, so we'll definitely see some performance decrements. So now with training, you will see performance drop because you're tired, you're breaking things down. But these should be temporary decreases in performance, because you recover and then you adapt, and now we get better. So we should see kind of peaks and valleys again, like I mentioned. If we are constantly seeing performance measures drop, you see here greater than 2 months, that's probably at the point where you're already overtrained, if we've seen decreases going on for this long. So it's something that we at least want to keep our eye on. Are they constantly pushing? And when I say performance, that can mean a lot of things. That could be sports performance, running speed, power, things like that. It could be just working out. They're not lifting. We're not seeing progression where they're lifting heavier weights or more reps or a faster time or whatever it might be. Or it could just be they're just tired throughout the day. Their performance is just daily activities of daily living, and they're just run down. All right, so these are all signs that we have to watch out for. Now, resting heart rate is a great way to monitor recovery. There's something called heart rate variability, which is also another great way to measure your recovery status. But it's this idea that your nervous system kind of controls everything. And if we understand the status of your nervous system, we can see how much stress your body is under. So we have, our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous systems that should be working in balance. So the fight or flight and our rest and digest system. Now, both of those systems control your heart rate, your heartbeat. So Sympathetic's going to speed it up, parasympathetic's going to slow it down. Now, using heart rate is kind of a broad number to kind of watch. You're not going to see huge changes, but if you're watching it every day, you could see significant changes when your body is under excessive strain. That's why a lot of people use something like heart rate variability, which is looking at actually the intervals between heartbeats. So you would need some type of tool. There's apps out there and heart rate monitors that can do this, but it measures those to again see the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. So those aren't on-off buttons; those are both contributing. We're just trying to see which one's contributing more. And if we see lots of lots of sympathetic activity, we know that the fight or flight, you are under a lot of stress. Now that could be from exercise, it could be from stress in your everyday life, and it could be a combination of both. So we have to consider all of that. But monitoring these things really gives you a lot of information. So if you're monitoring your resting heart rate, it's something you do every morning. You just wake up, there's apps that you can use on your phone, or you put on a heart rate monitor and you just measure your resting heart rate before you get out of bed. Now we know with chronic exercise, we should see a decrease in resting heart rate, right? Your heart is becoming more efficient and it should beat less and less because it doesn't have to work as hard to supply your body with blood at rest. But if we are seeing a trend of increasing a few beats per minute every day, that's a sign that we're working a little bit harder. That sympathetic nervous system is really working, and it's a sign we're being stressed right now. You often see people where it's a sign that they're starting to get sick too. When we see that increase in resting heart rate, that sickness could just be something that they caught, or that could be because they're working so hard and not recovering. Their immune system is kind of fried, and it's not able to fight off some of these different things that it's being exposed to, and we get sick. So a lot of times you see like Olympic athletes who've been training super hard for 4 years, they peak for their event, and then they get sick afterwards because it's finally they push themselves to the absolute limit, and it's over, and their body is finally wants to recover, but they beat themselves up so bad that now that they're more susceptible to getting sick. Increased blood pressure, kind of same idea. So we're seeing that sympathetic nervous system working. So if that's something that they track with their heart rate, we would see that. And now with both these, you might have a daily kind of something happened, you had a bad dream or whatever it might have been. So don't just use one day to determine what's going on. You're really looking for trends here. So if you see over the last few days an upward trend in your resting heart rate or your blood pressure, that's a sign that something might be up here. Okay, we might see things like loss of appetite, difficulty sleeping. So we're going to talk a little bit more about sleeping as a tool for helping recovery, but if they're just so stressed, their body's being fighting, inflammation and all these other things, it might be causing some sleep disruption. And chronic muscle soreness as well. So it's okay to be sore, obviously, after a workout, but if you're always sore, and it's not just like a day or two, again, that's a sign we're straining those muscles too much. You break down muscle after a workout, it has to recover. If you don't give it that chance to recover, it's in a constant breaking down state, and it's going to be sore and be sore, right? Part of the reason you feel soreness is so your body's trying to tell you to stop, right? It's hoping that if you feel pain when you move, you won't move as much. It's so you allow it to recover properly. So again, a little bit of soreness after workouts is obviously expected, but when that soreness isn't going away and you constantly are training harder and harder while you're sore, that might be some issues there. So what do we do to avoid overtraining? Now, honestly, we'll talk about later. If you're writing a good program, I don't think you're going to need to worry about this too much, because you build in recovery, you build in deloads, and you plan for this. So you plan to push harder and harder and harder, and then you back off. So if you're writing a good program, you don't have to worry about this as much, but obviously things can still happen. You write down everything perfect on paper, but real life doesn't always work out so perfectly. So some other things that we want to consider. Number one is make sure they're listening to their body, and check in when every day that they come in, ask them, what's your body saying? Are you sore? Is that expected? Or no, we haven't worked out in a week. Why are you still sore? Whatever it might be, but having a good intake of when they come in for them to really listen to what's going on. Are there little nagging injuries that have been hanging around and not going away? You feeling run down? You feeling tired? Not really into working out? Maybe it was somebody that really loved exercising and now not so much. They're losing their motivation. These are all signs that they've hit that overtraining syndrome. So make sure they are listening to their body and they hear some of these warning signs. Sleep, as I mentioned, this is going to be critical. Our bodies restore and recover mainly while we sleep. We know most of the muscle building that occurs is going to be at night when you're asleep. So there are so many negative health effects from lack of sleep. So it's not just for performance, it's not just for overtraining. There's a long list of issues that come up. So we want to make sure that this is something that they're paying attention to. So if they are not getting adequate sleep and you're trying to push them really hard in a workout, that might be overload on the body. So obviously sleep could be its own workshop and we're just touching on it here, but just make sure are we at least discussing this? Are we talking about, are they sleeping? Are they doing everything possible to enhance quality of sleep? And this might not be an area where you feel comfortable talking about with a client, but you could do research, find somebody who is, to really help them out, or at least make your client aware. You're not getting your 8 hours of sleep per night, and you're working too late, whatever it might be. It's just getting them on a schedule. That's probably the easiest place to start people. Set an alarm at night. When the alarm goes off, that's when you start your nighttime routine, and then you get into bed, and then no activities when you're in bed. You're not going to be on the phone or computer or anything. It's just time to go to sleep. So it doesn't always help. Some people have issues falling asleep and staying asleep and things like that. But if we can at least start getting them on a regular schedule so their body's used to, hey, at 10 o'clock, I wind down, I go to bed, TV's off. That's it. We go to sleep, and then 8 hours later, I at least allow for 8 hours of sleep, and then wake up hopefully refreshed from there. And obviously nutrition and hydration, right? If we're pushing our bodies, it needs adequate nutrients to restore. And we need to make sure, again, that are we having those conversations? Are you eating a 500 calorie diet and working out like crazy, right? That's a recipe for disaster. We want to make sure that they understand the lower your caloric intake goes, the less energy you have for things like this. So you can't have it both ways. We need to make sure that we're fueling our body properly to fuel ourselves for the workout, and then fuel ourselves for the recovery as well. And then obviously getting adequate hydration so our muscle tissue is staying healthy and our bodies can function the way that they are supposed to. So just making sure they're doing their food logs, they pay attention, they have an idea of how much water they should be drinking each day, before workouts, after workouts, all of that. And again, I know these are big topics that we're just kind of touching on. Variety in training. So we're going to talk about both having consistency and variety, but if they do the same thing all the time, this is another fast track for overtraining. So you might have some people who, they found that workout in a magazine and they've been doing it for the past 10 years. That's probably not a great thing. They've gotten all they're going to get out of that program, and now they're just straining their joints and their muscles in the same exact manner over and over and over again. We need some variety there, so we're getting a break. Or this might be kind of like the runners are usually guilty of this, where all they do is run. It's a very, very repetitive activity. So now if they're training for a run, they obviously have to run, but this is why cross training is so important, because we need that variety. We need a break in that same forward sagittal plane movement, the same knee movement, hip movement over and over and over and over again. There's no wonder that runners suffer from so many injuries, because this overtraining, they're just doing too much of the same thing. So giving them ideas on how they can break it up, whether it's strength training or getting on a bike or in a pool or whatever it might be. And then finally, just having your clients keep logs will always go a long way. And I know sometimes this can be a pain and a little bit tedious, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. But just track how, again, this kind of goes right back to number one, listening to your body. So tracking your heart rate, right? If you took your heart rate every single morning, you'd start seeing trends. You would see, hey, I had a really tough workout yesterday. My heart rate my resting heart rate did go up a little bit, or maybe my HRV, my heart rate variability, went down a little bit. But I recovered, and then the next day it was back to normal, right? And that's exactly what we want to see. But if we have a couple days in a row where either your resting heart rate's going up or your heart rate variability is going down, we can start to pay attention. And I may have had planned a really, really tough workout, but some of the things their body is saying is really telling me that this is probably not the best time. We need to alter the program to allow them a little bit more recovery here. All right, like I mentioned, I think sleep is such an important thing that really gets skipped over. So having them take a sleep log. When did you fall asleep? When did you wake up? Just tracking it in some way. I personally use an app called Sleep Cycle that I just every night it's on my phone and I just track my sleep. It'll let me know if I'm being regular. So and it's kind of cool. It'll tell you messages that, hey, you fell asleep last night a lot later than you normally do. Try to get back on track, and it kind of tracks all of that and how long it takes you to fall asleep, and your deep sleep, when you wake up, how much you snore, whatever it might be. So really cool just to track. So again, me personally, I have some clients that do this. I try and at least get everybody to track their heart rate because I think it's such a simple thing. But the nerdier they are, the more likely they are to add some of these other things. Like me personally, I'll do HRV, I'll do HR, and I'll do sleep every single night. So now I can really have some good data to look at. So I can see, hey, my resting heart rate's up the last couple days, my HRV's down the last couple days, and my sleep quality has been down. And I had a really tough workout planned for today. I might reconsider that and try something new. So this is, I'll admit, a lot easier to do yourself than clients, but some of these apps make it really, really easy so you can just show them some different ways that they can start tracking things like that. You can look at weight. We don't want people obsessed with their weights, but are they losing weight and they're not trying to lose weight, or they're gaining weight? Just to keep, it's just a number to just kind of let us know what's going on there. Mood. Like I said before, loss of motivation is a key sign of overtraining. And if we see somebody who is typically always in a good mood and they're ready to work out and all of a sudden they're not, that's telling us something as well. So maybe we need to keep an eye on them there. And then intensity. Again, just making sure they're not always pushing hard. Good idea it's really simple log is every workout, you just write down, okay, scale of 1 to 10, and you can ask them either after you've trained them or if they're doing a workout on their own. Scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest workout you could possibly do, where are you? And if we constantly are seeing like 9, 10, 9, 10, 8, they're pushing hard all the time, right? We need to make sure we get a few 5s, 6s, right? It shouldn't always be intense. We need those peaks and valleys. So just tools to help monitor that overload that you're putting on the system there. Okay, moving to our next principle, we're going to talk about specificity. So the program must facilitate the goals. We need to listen. We need to listen to what our clients are looking for. We can't have a cookie cutter program where my 8 a.m. client, my 9 a.m., my 10, they all do the same exact workout, right? That's not what a professional does. A professional is going to look at each unique client, understand what their goals are, and create some individualization. Right? You might have templates where you have a system that everybody, and hopefully you'll start to get a system by the end of this webinar, but you tweak it, you have your system and then you start to tweak it based on what each person needs there. So with the principle of specificity, we're going to talk about the SAID principle, that is specific adaptations to imposed demands. So what that means is your body will adapt very specifically to the type of stress that is placed on it. So we see this probably all the time, right? So if we have somebody who's on a bike, that's their main form of exercise. So they're maybe training for a race, or they're just doing it for fun, but that's their main form of exercise, is getting on a bike. They might be super strong climbing up hills, have great endurance, just look like a rock star on that bike. But then you get them off the bike and you get them in the weight room and they're very weak. They move very poorly. They have no endurance. It's basically saying, they're good at what they do. They have specifically been training on the bike, but they have not been training for strength or power or movement or whatever it might be. So that's where they're going to struggle because they don't expose those types of stresses to their body. So you might have noticed, maybe you're a runner and you feel like your endurance is great, and then you went to play basketball and you just were dead, right? Because it's different. It's not the same. It's not the same stress on the body. Your body has to make different changes, different adaptations to be good at basketball versus running or biking or in the pool or whatever it might be. So we need to specifically train for what we're trying to accomplish. So is that endurance? Is that muscular endurance, cardiorespiratory endurance? You're looking for hypertrophy, strength, power, flexibility, function, performance, fat loss, rehabilitation, a little bit of everything. We need to understand, what is our client trying to do? How can we get them there? I need to design a program that will cause those specific adaptations, right? So we need to keep that in mind. There's only so many changes and so many adaptations that your body's going to be able to make. So I want to really dial in and make sure I'm focusing on specific areas. Now, I mentioned, what if they want a little bit of everything? That might be a common, just general fitness client. Like, I want better endurance, and I'd like to build a little bit of muscle, and I want to get stronger and more flexible, and all these different things. You can get a little bit better at everything if you're training that way. So you still have to expose that person to endurance, to things that will cause muscle hypertrophy, to things that will cause strength. They need to see that exposure. Just realize, if you're trying to work on everything at the same time, some of these adaptations are conflicting. They don't work the same way. So like strength and endurance are hard to get at the same time because they need different adaptations and they need different stimuluses. So if you're going to do a little bit of endurance and a little bit of strength, just know you'll never become, you'll never get the maximum of each. And that might be okay, right? If you have an endurance athlete, then we're going to heavily train for that endurance type work. If I have just, average person who's just trying to get a little bit more fit and feel better, and they want a little bit of everything, but they don't necessarily have to peak in any one of these, then that's when I'll hit a little bit of everything, right? Or maybe you have a bodybuilder and really all they care about is getting bigger. So I spend a lot of time on that hypertrophy. So we need those specific demands to get this specific adaptation. Now, if you have somebody who's just getting started, maybe they've never worked out before, or it's been a really long time, then just about everything works. And that's, you kind of feel like an awesome trainer, right? When you first get somebody, because even when you were first getting started, it really, you just had to get them moving and then doing a few things, and they're going to see those changes. But what becomes a problem is then eventually a plateau is hit, and if you really weren't paying attention to what you were doing, it's hard to progress to make changes so they continue to see those results. So anybody can get results for that beginner or somebody who's taken a long time off. It's, the great coaches and trainers can keep that progress going because they looked at the big picture. They didn't just look at the first few weeks. They were looking well past that to make sure we're going to start here, then we move here, then we move here, and keep progressing from there. Okay, our next principle, reversibility, and this is that idea of use it or lose it. So this one we kind of have to be careful because, as I mentioned, that fear, almost that fear of missing out. So if I don't work out, I lose it all. Now you will lose your gains if you remove the stimulus for too long of a time. So, and maybe you have, you broke a leg or arm and you had to put it in a cast or a brace or something like that, and you were there for 4 weeks, 6 weeks or longer. You take the cast off, and what happened to that muscle, right? It's half the size of the other one. So if you stop moving, your body needs to get rid of stuff. So we know muscle is, in particular, is very metabolic. It has a high demand for energy. So if and I mentioned before, your body wants to be efficient. So in order to be efficient, it needs to cut things that are costing too much, right? We got to cut the budget. So one of the first things to go would be muscle, right? So if we think of like driving a car, if I park my car and just leave the engine running and then run into the grocery store, and that's how I, go about my day. So one, maybe my car's gonna get stolen, but If it doesn't, it's going to run out of gas a lot faster, right? Because the engine on is going to use up that fuel a lot faster than if I just turn the car off. So it's that idea. So the muscle's burning lots of fuel because it needs to in order to maintain itself. But once it doesn't need that muscle, it's going to cut the engine. It's gonna turn that off, and we're going to start to lose that muscle mass, lose that strength. And it can happen, I say quickly, but that's if you really do nothing, right? You might see something where you can start this whole process of muscle breakdown can start within like 24 hours, 48 hours. But that's with most of the studies looking at that are with immobilization. So like if you're on bed rest or you're in a cast and you just cannot move that muscle anymore. But that's not real life, right? You still move around, you lift stuff up, you climb stairs, you use your muscles to some degree. So it's not like they just went from 100 to 0 and aren't doing anything. But after a few days, we do start to see a loss. So if they worked out on Monday and did nothing for the rest of the week, they actually are going to start to lose any gains that they received from that workout. This is why, and again, how we're going to consider this with writing our program is we need frequent exposure in order to see these gains and keep them continuing. So if you're working out 1 day a week, it's really hard to make any gains. I'm not saying you won't see any, but because of this principle, we're going to, maybe make a little gain and then it's all going to go away by the next time we work out. It's not enough exposure. And then obviously we can go off the other end and work out every single day as hard as we can, and then we're back in our overtraining status. So when you write a program, this is what you need to consider. Should a client come in every week or every day? Should they come in 2 days a week, 3 days a week? Right? We need to understand I need enough exposure that they're going to keep making gains, but not so much exposure that they're going to overtrain, right? So this is where you might have a beginner who they're going to come in a little bit less because they don't need quite as much exposure, but they do need longer recovery because they are going to be super sore. But if you have somebody who has been training a little bit longer, they are used to this and they're going to be able to train a lot more frequently, recover a lot faster, and plus they need more exposure in order to see those gains continue because it gets harder and harder to make that progress the more we have been training. So that's what we want to consider with this principle of reversibility, finding that right balance there. And that's, again, we're going to talk a lot about program design and periodization, but that's the whole point, right? We're going to reduce volumes periodically, but not eliminate exercise. We have, again, peaks and valleys. Hopefully you don't get tired of me hearing or saying peaks and valleys over and over. Okay, and then the last principle I want to talk about is progression. So it's similar to overload, right? We have overload sufficient overload to create some type of adaptation. That will only get you so far, right? If you are doing push-ups and you do 5 and that's a real struggle, and then you do 5 again and it's still a little struggle, but it's getting a little bit easier and it's getting easier and easier and easier and easier. If we don't progress, we don't see sufficient overload anymore. So these two principles are kind of related. So there's no single training philosophy or system that can sustain optimal progression forever. And this is why we need to progress, right? So to go from different types of programs, and obviously we're going to be talking about periodization and understanding how we can continue to see gains for as long as possible. So like I said, the beginners are going to see lots of gains right off the bat, lots of adaptations. The more and more they train, the harder and harder that gets, the more advanced you're going to have to progress them and different challenges there. So when we say progression, it's going to include a lot of different things, and we'll talk about different ways to progress. But just to give you an idea, we see the push-up right here. So this could be changing positions. So I guess you can look at this as a type of load, but we're also changing body position. We might start on an incline, and then once that becomes too easy, we go to the floor, and then we go feet elevated. So it's all a push-up, we're just progressing it there. We can change the type of load that we're going to do. Maybe we're doing squats using a kettlebell in the beginning, and then we might switch it to using sandbags, and then we might switch it to using barbells. So there could be, 50 pounds for each of those, but a 50-pound kettlebell, a 50-pound sandbag, and a 50-pound barbell are not all the same. So that is another way we can change progression. We can change speed, we can go faster, we can go slower, we can change rest periods, we can change sets, reps. So we're going to talk about all these different things, but we want to make sure that we can't stay with the same things forever. Like I talked about, that person that has that same workout they've been doing since high school and they're in their 40s now, and they're at least maintaining some level of fitness, but really they've lost, or they're not getting any more out of that program, that they didn't get the first few weeks of it, and now they've just really been maintaining ever since then. So this is what we have to consider in order to constantly see that progression there. So this is where it does get a little bit more challenging. You need a system in place to manipulate change. So we want to use periodization in order to understand how to push people, how to progress, how to overload them, how to deload or recover, how to push, right? So we look at this as basically a long-term training plan based on their goals. And it's going to have a variety of changes in intensity, volume, and rest. The point is that you have some type of system in place. So any type of system is better than no system. To just take somebody day one and just say, let's go through some exercises and see how you do, and I'm going to go heavier and heavier and heavier until it becomes more and more challenging, it's only going to get you so far, right? So we want a system in place where we can look at all the different variables we can change and really, again, keep in mind what were their goals and what's the best way to get them to those goals. Here's a few research articles on periodization. So both of these, the first one was a meta-analysis. So it looked at a number of different studies. Actually, these were two meta-analyses, one from 2005, one from 2017, that compared a periodized program versus non-periodized. So basically, one that was following a system where they were increasing intensity as they went along throughout the program. The other one was just working out kind of randomly. They would just give them random exercises to do. And what they found was in all studies that kind of followed this process, that strength and power improvements were significantly better improvement than non-periodized. So just working out in general, again, it's better than nothing, right? You're exercising, you're moving, you're burning calories, it's good, but we don't want just good, we want great. And we want to do the things that are going to get the best results. And clearly, when you periodize a program, it's going to do that. Another article from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research looked at 15 weeks of a periodized training program versus a non-periodized training program. With the Australian Army, saw better improvements for fitness testing that they had to do, that standard fitness testing in their army. In their army, they saw those that did 15 weeks of periodized training where they pushed them along got better improvements over for their fitness testing. So again, what was their goal? They need to get better at these fitness tests. They put a program together that would progress them to peak for that event, and they saw the most improvements when they planned over those 15 weeks versus just doing random workouts. So here's where it can get a little bit confusing because there's different models that you can follow. It is not right, wrong. These are just different ways to implement some of those principles that we were talking about. In certain populations, in certain scenarios, some types of periodization work better than others, but all are going to work. And that's, the research is pretty clear there that any system works better than no system. So now you're just going to find the ones that seem to work best for your population, or you might use a variety. So typically what we're going to see with periodization, so remember, periodization is just our long-term plan for exercise. So how we're going to go from here to there. We can do it in a linear model. We might see something like traditional or block training. So linear is basically following a linear progression of low intensity, high volume, to high intensity, low volume. So that's what we'd see with kind of our traditional training. So you might start with let's just say it's for strength training, we're going to do low intensity, so that means lighter percentages based off of our 1 rep max, but we might be doing more reps. And then as we progress through the program, we're going to be gradually increasing the loading and decreasing the volume on it. Block training is a type of linear. It's very similar, but it has 3 blocks that we would be progressing through. Accumulation, transformation, and realization. It's basically same idea, going from lower intensity to higher intensity, where that realization phase is where we're trying to peak. We're trying to max out on all of our different exercises. So really trying to gain strength in that realization phase, and then we recover, and then we start over, and we keep cycling through these different blocks. Nonlinear basically just doesn't go in that linear fashion. It doesn't necessarily go from low to high. So we might see something like alternating periodization. So this could be something, let's just say I use months to divide up my program. In month 1, maybe I'm doing low sets, high reps, so kind of more endurance based. And then month 2, I'm going to be doing high sets, low reps, so kind of hitting more of that strength. And then month 3, I might be going to kind of hypertrophy, that moderate reps, moderate sets. And then month 4, maybe I start back over with endurance. So it's not going higher to lower or lower to higher. It's kind of jumping around there. Then we also have undulating periodization. So undulating is going to be working on multiple goals all at once. So I kind of talked about this already briefly, where you might have some days that are high reps, some days that are moderate reps, some days that are low reps. So it seems random, but it's all still part of a plan. So we'll talk a little bit more about undulating periodization. Okay, so let's look a little bit more at undulating periodization. So what this specifically means, what we're going to do is we're going to be adjusting variables a little bit more frequently. In more linear block type training, you essentially are working on kind of a specific goal for a set period of time, kind of maximize that goal, and then you're going to progress from there, maybe increasing intensity, for example. With undulating periodization, there's a little bit more variety in there. More frequent variety, but it's still planned. It's not random. It's all part of a system. We're just going to see more frequent changes. So this could be weekly changes. This could be daily changes. There's a few different ways that we can implement this, but we are going to challenge different types of training at more regular intervals. So kind of the easiest way to look at it is like if we look at reps. So rep ranges will vary maybe week to week or even workout to workout, depending on how you set it up. If it's a weekly undulating program or a daily undulating program. We could even use different volumes, reps, sets, loading with each exercise in the same workout. And we'll talk about hybrid training a little bit later. But the most common you're going to see is the weekly and the daily. So for example, we might see something where, again, in kind of that block training, we might be specifically working one whole phase, one whole block towards one specific goal, like improving muscle strength. And you're going to get really, really strong and maximize that one goal. Now, if all you're doing is working on strength, you are going to have limitations elsewhere. So this might be limitations in something like muscular endurance. You're not going to see the same change there. So this could be a good or a bad thing, depending on who you're working with. You might have a client who is really just trying to get stronger. That's all they care about. So maybe more of a block style training or a linear program design would be the best fit for that person. But you might have those clients that they want to get stronger, but they also want endurance. They want to work on different goals at different time or at the same time. So undulating might be a little bit better because we're going to continually change the variables, so they're going to get some exposure on a regular basis to all of these different attributes. So strength, endurance, hypertrophy, all the different things there. So we have a little bit more variety within a given program. So we can see this is a study from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research where they wanted to compare block training, so kind of that linear model, to an undulating training program. um, the charts here, the pictures that you see, the top one is kind of more that block, or see the linear fashion. So every 2 weeks they altered the program. So weeks 1 and 2, they were at that 70% of 1 rep max, doing 10 reps. Then weeks 3 and 4, they increased the intensity to 75% of their 1 rep max, and we're doing 8 reps. Then they did our deload week. They're doing 65%, 3 sets, 2-minute recovery in between, and then they continued from there. They went 88% of their 1 rep max, they dropped the reps down, 93, and then 10 weeks of training there. Compare that to the undulating. So this would be a weekly undulating model. So they started exactly the same, 70%. They were doing sets of 10. Then the very next week, they increased the intensity, dropped the sets down, doing 75%. The next week, decreased the reps again and increased the intensity, and so on until we get to that week 5 deload, and then started over. So both training were similar, but you could just see how the setup altered. And they both trained for 10 weeks. This study was looking at females in particular, and what they found. So first, they found that both block periodization and undulating periodization led to improvements in participants. So that's the good news there, is both of these work. So we don't want to think of this as a right-wrong. They will both get you stronger, they can build muscle, they can improve endurance, just depending on how you set it up. So they're both effective training programs, and that's why they've been around for such a long time. But one interesting note was that the undulating periodization saw significantly higher improvements in fat mass loss, arm and thigh circumference increase, so bigger muscles, and lower body strength gains. So we saw both got better, but the undulating group got a little bit better than the block training group. So this is just one study. We don't want to completely, throw everything all in on undulating periodization, but it does show some promise there. And as we see more research, hopefully we'll see similar results there. So just remember, they're both good options, but we did see, because of this variation that we supplied in the program, even more improvements with that undulating. And honestly, I think a lot of clients appreciate it because, hey, you know what? It could be the same exact workout for 10 weeks, but just altering on a more regular basis. They still master the movements, but we're just loading them a little bit differently. And it just seems like a different workout. So even though it's not a ton of more variety, they still feel like they're getting not the same workouts over and over again. So it might be a great way to have them feel like we're mixing it up a little bit more, even though we're just changing the rep and set scheme here. Okay, so that was one example, and that's a really common. So I personally, how I like to look at it is week 1 of the month, we go more higher repetition. Week 2 of the month, we drop it down and we increase the intensity. Week 3 of the month, we continue, drop it down again, and week 4 is going to be our heaviest week, and we're training the hardest that week. I like doing it that way, and I know it doesn't always work out perfectly 4 weeks in every month, but if we're kind of cycling through every month like that, when we get back to the first week of the month, we're backing off intensity. So it almost builds in a little bit of a deload there. So we're not pushing as hard as possible each time, and then they get a chance to learn the new program. So that first week, we go a little bit lighter, and we're just kind of going through the movements. Next week, we load it up a little bit more. The next week, we load it up again. And then the final week is when we're trying to push as hard as we can. So we have 1 week of the month that we're trying to set records. We're trying to push as hard as we can. All of the other weeks are building up to that particular goal there. So that's one way that you can set it up. Another way, I keep mentioning daily undulating periodization. And this would be an example of that. So this is within a week. You could see how we have variations there. So let's just say we have a program that we wrote for somebody, and they're going to be training 3 days a week. So instead of the whole week being devoted to strength as our primary goal, maybe day 1 is devoted to strength. Day 2 is going to be devoted to hypertrophy. So we're doing more of the moderate reps, moderate sets, moderate loading. And then day 3 is more endurance. And it doesn't have to be this way. Maybe you started with endurance and worked your way up to strength. There's different ways you can set this up. But some people like to look at it as like a heavy day, a moderate day, and a light day, if you like to look at it that way as well. But just the idea that each day of the week has a slightly different goal. All right, so it could be Monday's always our strength day, Wednesday's our hypertrophy day, and Friday is our endurance day. All right, so there's lots of different ways you can set that up. I just wanted to give you some ideas on how you might organize the program, whether it's the weekly model or the daily. But undulating periodization does seem to be a very effective way to design programs. So hopefully this is giving you ideas on how you might start setting up their specific workouts. Okay, so now we've talked about the principles and we've talked about periodization, and I hope that the more we're talking, that you're not confused. You're starting to get good ideas on how to start writing a program. But I want to make it as easy as possible. So let's talk about some program writing essentials. So what do you need to keep in mind? Yes, this takes more time and it takes more work, but again, we're trying to set ourselves apart and we're trying to give our clients the best service that we possibly can. And I think having a solid program written out is a great way to do that. So what are we going to do? I think beginning with the end in the mind is a great place to start. So if somebody wants a program, let's look at that end. Where do they want to be? That's going to be our start. So if we understand where they want to finish, we know, well, how long is this going to take? So if they tell you they want to lose 50 pounds and that's the goal in their program, so we can say, all right, this is going to take some time. This is not a 4-week program that we can get to. So now I can give them recommendations. So if you're trying to lose this much weight, and we can't predict how fast they're going to lose weight, but we can, take our best educated guess on how long we think this will take if they do all the right things. This is the kind of program that we're going to be looking at here. And it's a great way to get some commitment and buy-in so they know this is what you're looking at, right? We're not just going to work out for a few sessions. This is a long-term commitment that you're looking to do if you're wanting to hire me as a coach or hire you as a coach. So we need to know how much time do we have. And it could be, well, there's a date, right? So it's a wedding, it's a family, it's a reunion, whatever it might be. There's a specific date that they're trying to get ready for. So now we have this specific end. So I know it's going to be 3 months. So we have 3 months to get you where you need to go. We can set up our expectations and write the program from there. Then I need to know, well, how many days a week are we talking? And this could be with a trainer and without a trainer. So you can work out 5 days a week, but maybe financially I can only work out with a trainer 2 days a week. So I can still provide a program, a 5-day-a-week program, and I just know that 2 of the days will be with me, and then 3 would be on your own, and we can set up the workouts that way. But to sit down and just write up this program and never even know how many days they realistically can work out is going to be a mistake. We want to know what they can do, and then what can they handle, right? So they might say I can work out every day, but they've never worked out before, right? So a 7-day-a-week program is probably not a good fit for that person. And just knowing, are they a beginner? Are they more advanced? If they're a beginner, like I mentioned, we don't need as much variety. We just need consistency, and that's what we're going to focus on. Master the movements, get really good. Then we can start adding variety in there. If they've been working out for a while and they can handle a little bit more, we're going to train more frequently. We can hit higher intensities. I can vary that program a little bit more. And then we need a plan for recovery. So we want to make sure you write up the program understanding, kind of like in that example we saw with the studies, every 4th week, the 5th week, they had a deload week where they're still working out, but they're not pushing as hard as they can. They're doing lighter loads, less repetitions, longer recoveries properly. So still going to work out, still going to break a sweat, but they're not going to do, they're not trying to peak at that particular point. So we want to plan for things like that so we understand where they're going to back off. Again, looking for those peaks and valleys. So I like steps, I like checklists. So I thought this was maybe an easy way to look at it. So you sit down with a client, here's what we're going to do. Step 1, let's define the program length. So how long are we talking, right? So maybe they don't know, right? So this is a little bit tricky, but let's figure out what length of the program we're looking for. So if they give us a weight, we can say, all right, well, if we work really hard and do a lot of the right things, this should take 6 months, or this should take a year, whatever it might be. All right, so that's looking at your macro cycle. So the macro cycle is basically big picture. How long is this entire program going to take? Now, we might say it's a year, but they're going to end up training with you for 5 years. That's okay. that's just going to be a new program, because most likely after a year, their goals have changed. Maybe they lost 30 pounds and they're not really interested in losing 30 pounds anymore, but they want to run a 5K, and it's going to be in 3 months. All right, so we know the length. We have a 3-month program, and we're going to go from there. So that's okay. So we just figure what's the goal we're working on now, and let's set a term, and let's start going from there. Right, then let's break it down even more. So we have our mesocycles. So this will depend. This could be 3 months, a month. Again, just depends on how you're doing your periodization. So that's typically, if we look at like your block training or your linear, you might say, okay, mesocycle 1 is going to be endurance, then we're going to go to hypertrophy, then we're going to go to strength, and then we're going to go back to endurance and cycle through that way. So that might be our mesocycle breakdown. But regardless, step 2 is you're going to choose your periodization model. So which one of those do you want to follow? Do you want to do something more linear, where we're going to start with lower intensity and build up? Or are we going to do more like undulating periodization, or maybe alternating, right? So again, it's not right, wrong. You're going to play around and see what works best for each client. Then we'll have an idea of what all our cycles will be. Now you're going to start to fill out your cycles. So like I mentioned, is it phase 1 is going to be endurance, phase 2 is going to be hypertrophy, phase 3 is going to be strength, phase 4 is power, whatever, and you can keep progressing. You're going to focus on what's important to that client. I'm just giving you a few examples there. Or maybe it's going to be undulating. So maybe in the beginning, we're going to do weekly undulating. So phase maybe 1 is going to start with that weekly undulating periodization. Phase 2, maybe it's going to be the same, but we're going to change up the program in some manner. Maybe we're going to increase the intensity on everything. Maybe we're going to vary the movements, whatever it might be. And then maybe phase 3, we're getting into more daily undulating because they've advanced enough to progress to something like that. So that's how we're going to break it down. And then, so these are the first steps of writing the program, are just writing out the big picture. Like this is just your template, right? So you have a year-long template. Here's what phase 1 is the main goal. Here's phase 2's main goal, phase 3, phase 4, whatever it might be. Then really all this should take you just a few minutes to write all this down. Where the work comes in is when you get down to those individual sessions. So now you have to actually write out the workouts, write out the sets, the reps, the loading, all of those things there. So that's going to take the most work. But if at least you have an idea, if you know, okay, phase 1, I have 3 days a week to work with somebody. We're going to do linear, and I'm going to start with endurance. So I know all of the workouts in phase 1 are going to be endurance based. So I know I'm going to be doing lower intensity, higher reps, and I'm going to create my 3-day-a-week program for the next 4 weeks. And then from there, our next phase is going to move into more hypertrophy training. So the rep sets are going to change there. And then we go through our program and we write all the exercises, we're squatting, we're lunging, we're doing push-ups, whatever it might be, but they're all following that element that we're trying to work on there. If it's undulating, then you just know, well, am I doing weekly or daily? And each workout is going to reflect that goal. So if it's daily, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to go heavy, moderate, light, something like that. Or if it's weekly, now I just know week 1 is lower intensity, and each week upon that we're going to make go a higher and higher intensity. So those are our basic steps that we want to consider when we're writing out this program. So like I said, yes, this takes work, but you're going to put this work in, and then all your work's done. Now we're just following the recipe, right? It makes the training session much easier because now I can really focus on what I'm supposed to be focusing on, and not what's the next exercise going to be, what weight do we need. We have it all written down there, and we're just ready to go. All right, so I kind of talked about this already. So our cycles. So again, just to recap, the macro cycle. So how long's the program going to be? Is it a month long? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? So that's your big picture. So how long do I have in this program? The mesocycle, so that's each phase. So it's typically about 4 weeks. So what are we going to work on each phase here? And then we have our microcycle. This is each week of training going through your specific workouts. So those are all the things you need to consider. So macro is easy. You just pick how long we're going for. then you start picking out your phases, and then you actually write up the individual workouts, right? And just remember that idea. What is the end goal, right? So clients here, they need to get there, and your program is the bridge to connect those two. So make sure that your program reflects that, right? So keep that in mind as you're writing it. And remember, you're going to make edits. Things won't go perfectly to plan, but at least you have the big pieces done, and then you can edit as you go as needed. Okay, so what are the things you can change within the program? So I've talked a lot about this already, but regardless of what program design model you're going to follow, these are all the things we need to consider changing, manipulating, whatever word you want to use. So you can change the exercises, obviously. So maybe you started with a bodyweight squat. Now we're going to do goblet squats and then barbell squats or whatever it might be. So the key is having a good progression regression model. So by that, we just say, you know what the next step is. So if you start with a bodyweight squat, what's the next challenge for that person? Or if you find out they can't do bodyweight squats, we made a mistake there, I need to make it easier. So how do I regress? So for all of your main movement patterns, keep that in mind. How do I progress? How do I regress? So that's just one thing that you can change. You don't have to change the exercises. If they're still learning it, you don't want to change the exercises that often. And that's where we kind of get in trouble, because we think the clients want all this variation, and sure, they do want variety in there, but imagine how frustrating it would be if you went to learn the guitar, and the first day you go, the instructor teaches you how to play an E chord, right? You get that down, by the end of the lesson you can play that chord, and then the next time you go in, you totally ignore the E chord and only play the C. So now you learn the C, but you totally forgot how to play that E chord, right? So movement's the same way. They finally got a movement down, and if you never expose it to them again, they don't really learn it, and we want that frequent exposure. So it's okay to keep exercises consistent, right? You can manipulate other things like your sets and reps. That's a lot of what we've been talking about so far, right? Do we want to go higher sets, lower sets, higher reps, lower reps? We'll talk more about that a little bit. Right, we're going to change the intensity, so the workload. So you may know your client's percent of 1 rep max. If that's information you have, then it's really easy. Take a percentage, right? You at 70%, 80%. You can manipulate that intensity there. And usually this goes with your sets and reps. Goals. So their goals might change. So you don't change their goal. This is something you help them with, but they might change their goal, right? Like I mentioned, they lost the weight they wanted to lose. Now they want to work on training for a race or getting ready for a show or whatever it might be. So keep those in mind. And we should be always asking about goals, because we want clients to stay with us for a long period of time. And if we help them lose that weight they were trying to lose, then what, right? We don't want to just be working out to work out. We're going to find a new goal to work on. Maybe they want to do an obstacle course race or a fitness competition or whatever, a marathon, right? So now let's find the next thing and let's work towards that. Rep speed, so we're going to talk more about this. We can slow it down, we can speed it up, we can alter rest intervals, so I can give you more rest, I can give you less rest. It just depends on what we're looking for there. So there's so many things, and this is not everything. These are just a few of the big things that we can change, but just make sure you are changing all of these things as much as needed, right? So if you've never played around with tempo and speed, that's something to try out. Try some eccentric, slow it down a little bit, or speed it up. Try some power work. If you've never changed the intensity, you're always doing 3 sets of 10 at kind of a moderate intensity, it's time to change it up. Let's reduce the intensity and go higher reps, or vice versa. Let's bump up that intensity and get the reps back down, right? And this is why one of the reasons, again, why I like undulating periodization, because you're kind of forced to do that. You get a little bit of everything in each workout there. Okay, so how many sets should we do? So we're just going to talk about a few of these different variables that we can change. So should we do 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets, 10? Does it make a difference? Well, we can look at quite a few studies out there that did look at the differences between a single set and multiple sets. But virtually all studies in recent years suggest multi-set protocols offer better for long-term results. Now, if you have somebody who's never done anything before, they're probably going to do just fine with single sets, and it might be better because they won't get as sore. Even one set might get them really, really sore, and maybe they never want to come back and see you again. So single set protocols may be great when you're working with somebody, a beginner, or maybe they haven't worked out in a really long time. It's a great way to ease them in. And because they're a beginner, they're still going to get a lot of benefit out of that, and they will see results from it. And hopefully it doesn't destroy them for the rest of the day so they can't get up off the couch at all. So another study in 2010 looked at single set versus multiple sets, and multiple sets were associated with a 40% greater increase in hypertrophy. So if muscle size is something that you're looking for, definitely going for multiple sets. But it was interesting to find they compared that to one versus multiple sets, but when they compared lower to higher numbers of sets, they didn't see a significant improvement. So 2 to 3 sets was pretty much as effective as 4 to 6. So doesn't mean 4 to 6 did nothing, it's just not a very significant improvement. So it depends, again, what are your goals? Are you trying to get really, really big? Well, we probably need to do more sets there. If that's not our main priority, then we're probably totally fine with 2 to 3 sets. And it comes down to logistics too and time management. How much time do you have? If you're going to go through 6 sets of an exercise, that takes a long time. You're only going to get through a couple of exercises there. So maybe you want more variety, and I know that 2 to 3 sets is going to be just as effective for most people's goals, so we can stick to that as kind of our general guideline. But again, you can vary it as needed. Okay, so we talked about sets and we have an idea of maybe how many sets we're going to be doing. And typically your sets and reps will be linked looking at your total volume, but we want to make sure that our reps are reflecting the goal. So remember, what's the goal that the client's looking for? Are they looking for strength? Are they looking for hypertrophy, endurance, whatever it might be? Are they in a specific phase? And that's really the goal. So maybe we're doing some type of linear or block periodization and we're in the strength phase, so we know that the goal is strength, so our reps are going to reflect that. So we have choices. The idea is just remembering that changing the reps changes what the adaptation that we're looking for. Remember, we're talking about specificity. So if we're looking for more of that strength goal, we're going to use the reps that reflect. We'll create that type of adaptation. And if we're looking for more of a metabolic or endurance-based goal, we'll choose those higher reps. So this is a continuum that we're looking on, and they all should be used. There's a benefit to doing all of these different things. Now, we might create more or less variety depending on, the client's goal and the type of training that we're doing. But if you're spending all of your time in one area, you're missing out on some of the benefits of the other type of training. So there's nothing magical about a specific number, but when we hit those lower repetitions, higher intensities, that's when we're going to be hitting more of our strength-based goals. We're going to get those higher threshold motor units to fire. Then moving to our more moderate repetitions with our moderate loading, we're going to be hitting those more muscle size or hypertrophy goals. And then when we hit some of our high reps, we're going to be getting into that endurance-based training or more metabolic effect. So again, just understand, well, why am I doing 3 sets of 10? Is that really what I'm looking for? Should I mix it up? Have I been doing that for a long period of time? And would they benefit from doing some other type of training? So if you're doing kind of that undulating periodization model, you're going to see a lot of variety from week to week likely. If you're doing more linear, you're typically going to start higher, more of this metabolic type range and work your way down into that strength. Again, it's not right, wrong, it's just different ways to achieve a specific goal. So now when we put our sets and reps together, we have a lot of variety in how we might do that. Most people are probably familiar with their standard sets, where we're going to do 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 8, 5 by 5, 10 sets of 3, whatever it might be. So we have a given number of sets, and we're going to do a certain number of reps within each of those sets. Now, that is going to be a great way to train, and a lot of people will get great results from something like that. Now, if they've been doing that for a long period of time, it might be a good idea to just change it up and create a little bit more variety in there. We can do something like step loading. Now, we know, again, there's nothing magical about 5 reps or 8 reps or 15 reps or whatever it might be. We're trying to hit a range of reps, and that's where step loading might come in handy. So we know, let's say for example, we're working more on a hypertrophy goal. We're in that phase of training. We know in that 8 to 12 rep range is typically a good idea with moderate loading to hit that goal. So we're going to create a little bit of variety within that goal. So maybe we start with 12, then next set we do 10, then 8, and our intensity will be increasing with each set. So again, pretty common, but that might be a way we load the movement. Or we can do the opposite. We can start with a heavier load, maybe we hit 8 reps, and then we lighten it up a little bit, and we go for 10 and then 12. That might be another way, so just going from low to high reps. Another great option that there's more and more research developing on is cluster sets. Now, on the surface, it looks kind of like that standard set where we have like 3 by 12, for example. But really, that 12, that set of 12 is going to be 4 sets of 3. So it's a set in which we take breaks within that set. So there's a lot of different benefits to do it. This is a great way to help people maybe break through plateaus that have been stuck. We're training at higher intensities, but we're hitting that kind of moderate rep range at 12 reps, for example, like we see here. But essentially how it would work is in that set, we would start and perform 3 reps. Then let's say we're doing something like a bench press. So we do our 3 reps and then we'll rack it and then we're going to rest. And our rest will be relatively short. There's different techniques that you might see, but it's typically somewhere from about 10 to 30 seconds rest. So you'll take a short rest and then you'll go right back to it, 3 more reps, rest, back up, 3 more reps, rest, 3 more reps. So it's really 4 sets of 3 to make up that set. So a great way to train to almost failure, but not quite. And it's just, again, a great way to mix it up. And there's some pretty good research showing that it is a great way to build strength and increase muscle size. And another popular technique we can use is wave loading. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, but this is an idea of similar to that step loading where we're going to be changing reps and intensity from set to set in order to create a little bit of more of a nervous system response where we're trying to get more and more motor units. So it's a great way to build strength. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So let's talk about hypertrophy. If we're going to be doing strength training, this is going to be one of the key adaptations that we're looking for. But even if bodybuilding isn't your main goal, we still want to develop muscle, increases in muscle size. We want strength. Now, obviously it's at different degrees, but this is an important goal that most people should be striving for. The more lean body tissue, typically overall, the better health somebody will have. So while they may not want to be a bodybuilder, and we have to make sure we are respectful of their goals, we do want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to help them get the goals that they've set for themselves. And if any form of hypertrophy is involved in that, here are the 3 main ways that we can maximize hypertrophy. So really the 3 ways that we're going to create increases in muscle size. And that's mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. So we'll expand on each a little bit more and give you some examples, but they're like they sound. So mechanical tension, this is where we just need to load the skeletal muscle. The more you load it, the stronger it's going to get and the more of a demand to increase muscle size. Metabolic stress, this is creating higher amounts of tension to create a metabolic response, right? The more we stress a muscle and the longer we stress it for and have it work, the more byproducts of energy production occur, the more hormones that are going to be released, and ultimately the bigger the muscles are going to get. And then finally, we have muscle damage, and this is where a lot of people think of hypertrophy. We break the muscle down, we build it up so it's bigger and stronger. And a lot of times we're using some type of eccentric training to really maximize this goal here. So let's talk a little bit more about mechanical tension and a few techniques. So like I said, we're trying to place large amounts of force on the muscles through full range of motion. We want to recruit as many motor units as possible. So the motor units is the nerve and all of the muscle fibers that nerve activates. We don't always activate every muscle in a muscle group if we don't need to. Remember, the body's goal is to be efficient and not waste energy. So if it doesn't need to do something, it will not do it. So for example, if you are holding a pencil and you kind of bicep curl it and pick it up, while you do that, if you feel your bicep, you feel some things move, but really the muscle's still soft because not that many motor units needed to fire. We don't need that many muscle fibers in order to lift up a pencil. But now if you grab a 20-pound dumbbell or just pretend you're lifting something heavy, now we've created enough resistance where we need to recruit more motor units. So the more tension you can put on a muscle, the more motor units, the more muscle fibers that will activate. When we can do this, we're recruiting more of our fast twitch muscle fibers, just more muscle fibers in general. So there's going to be more stress, more strain, which means more adaptations. So the more motor units, and you're gonna hear this in a lot of these techniques, the more motor units that we recruit, the better results that we are going to get from that in terms of strength and muscle size. Now, two really popular, well, one I should say, in order to increase mechanical tension, you load the muscle, right? So this is doing intensity, very high intensities close to your 1 rep max. So when you're hitting those reps, like 6 reps or less with the appropriate intensity, that's essentially what we're doing here. Now, two very common ways we can do that other than just loading up at high intensities would be wave loading, which we briefly started to talk about, and isometrics. So wave loading, it's like I mentioned, it's a way to involve the nervous system a little bit more and using this idea of motor units. So like I said, not all motor units will fire in a given exercise. So when we do something lower intensity, something easier, lighter, the lower threshold motor units will engage first. So these are a lot of our fast twitch muscle fibers, better for endurance, they aren't able to handle much strength and speed. But as the intensity goes up or the weight gets heavier and heavier, we're going to start to recruit some of those higher threshold motor units. So essentially what we're going to do is alternate between heavy and light resistances in order to kind of trick the nervous system into recruiting more motor units. So if we can use a heavy load and recruit a lot of our motor units, they're active, they're engaged, they're kind of ready to go. And then when we do in the next set, the idea is that we can keep those motor units firing and feel stronger and stronger. So that's kind of the idea behind wave loading, and I'll give a little example here. So typically we're going to use 2 to 3 waves. So in the example you see here, this would be a two wave load scheme. It typically works better with higher reps, or excuse me, heavier workloads, lower reps like 6 or less. And then we're going to change the reps, in general 1 to 3, but you can definitely play around and try different things here. And the idea is you're going to increase the workload for the second wave. That's when we hit that second wave, the idea is we've recruited more motor units, we're going to hit higher, or we'll be able to lift more weight. So this might be an example. So we have 6 sets here, and there's consists of 2 waves. So we're doing a 3-2-1 rep scheme. So might start with 100 pounds, and we go for 3 reps. Then our next set, we're going to load up a little bit more, go 110 pounds and perform 2 reps. Then we're going to go 115 and perform 1 rep. So now we're at a very high intensity if we're hitting that for 1 rep. In the second wave, again, the idea that we've recruited more motor units after going through that first wave, we're going to bump up the intensity. So now we're going to go back to 3 reps, but instead of 100 pounds, we're going to go up to about 105. Then our next step, instead of 100, we're going 115, and then finally 120. So that would be 2 waves there. And we could even add a third one and start over, 3, 3, 2, 1, if we wanted to do 9 total sets. So it does take a little bit of time because you're typically doing higher sets, but it is a great technique for increasing that mechanical tension, getting more motor units to fire. And you see a couple other rep schemes that you could potentially do, like 6 reps, 1 rep, 6, 1. So we're going like moderate loading, very heavy, moderate load, very heavy, and trying to bump that up each round, or 12, 6. So we can bump the reps up a little bit there as well. So just to give you a few examples of how we could use wave loading. And then clearly isometrics are going to be a great way to increase muscle tension. So when we do these maximal isometric actions, like when we push something that can't be pushed or pull something that can't be pulled or moved, nearly all of our motor units can be recruited, and that's exactly what we're looking for. We can increase intramuscular tension for much longer periods of time than maybe in a set of a bench press or squats. So we get more motor units firing, and we get them firing for longer, which is a great combination there. Now, this could potentially be a good thing or a bad thing, but it improves strength at a specific point in range of motion. So if I'm only doing isometrics at one range, that's really where I'm getting all the benefits. So we want to make sure we alter that up a little bit. And it doesn't require much energy. So this could be used as almost like an active rest sometimes. So there's lots of different applications that we can use with our isometrics. So just applying some of these isometric drills, like I said, hold a weight at a specific position in a range of motion, and typically use maybe 3 positions per movement. You know, if we're sticking with our bench press here and we're doing an isometric at the bottom, that's where we're getting the strongest there. If I'm holding it at the top, then primary strength is gained there. So that's why we want to alter it and do maybe at the top, in the middle, at the bottom, work those different ranges there. These are maximal contractions that we're looking for, so pushing or pulling against an immovable object. So maybe taking a barbell and putting it in a squat rack and throwing a weight, you know that there's no way that you could possibly move it, and you just set it up so it's just above your chest, and then you just try and push it as hard as you can, and then you can raise it up in the squat rack so it's a little bit higher, and then same thing, you push it again. So there's all sorts of ways that we can incorporate isometrics. Just make sure it is to that kind of maximal loaded position. And then how long are we going to hold it? For about 1 to 10 seconds. That'll typically be enough, and obviously you can go longer, but when we're hitting these max loaded positions, it's much more difficult to go longer than that. And then the big thing is make sure you're breathing, because a lot of times people load so much and then they push so hard they just hold their breaths for the whole time, and we know that's a quick way to boost your blood pressure, so we want to be careful with doing something like that. Okay, so next I want to move on to increasing metabolic stress. So like I mentioned, when we say metabolic stress, the muscles that are working are requiring a lot of energy. They're requiring a lot of demand for attention, basically. They're boosting the metabolism, and they're creating lots and lots of byproducts. And as these byproducts build up, they send signals to the rest of the body that, hey, something's going on and we need to do something about it. And that response is usually releasing hormones to help with muscle repair or muscle growth, whatever it might be. So we have things like hydrogen ions and lactic acid building up as we exercise, and typically it's not a big deal and our body handles it, but as we create more and more metabolic stress, it's essentially the muscle screaming for help, and that help is going to create the adaptation of bigger muscles. So 2 popular ways that we can increase metabolic stress. One is blood flow restriction training, which we see a picture here of that, and the other is just different drills that increase time under tension. So using like 1.5 rep training or no pause training, and we'll talk about a few examples there. So I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about blood flow restriction training, just because logistically it's very difficult to set up unless you have the tools like we see in this picture in order to do it accurately. Now, there is a great deal of evidence that this is very effective. We'll talk a little bit about how it works, but it has been shown to really help increase muscle size. And essentially how it works is you partially restrict arterial inflow and fully restrict venous outflow in a working muscle during exercise. So like we see here, that would that cuff that's on the upper thigh will increase in pressure so much that it will partially allow blood to flow in to the muscle. So the heart's pumping through blood through the arteries, and that's getting to the muscle to supply oxygen and other things that that muscle needs. Now, if it's restricting venous outflow, so we know the muscle gets the blood gets to the muscle a lot easier than it gets out, right? Because we have the heart pumping, but then we need help to get it out of there. And if you're blocking it off with pressure, it's going to get stuck there. So this creates a hypoxic environment in the muscle and blood pooling, right? So we have a higher need for oxygen, and we're having a hard time getting it to the muscle. And we have a buildup of these byproducts that I was referring to earlier in the muscle because they can't get out. So there is a lot of havoc going on in these muscles when we restrict that blood flow there. Then we would perform our sets. So in this case, might be doing squats or bicep curls or whatever it might be. With this buildup of things, like lactic acid, it's changing pH levels, hydrogen ions are building up, and it's going to burn. And these workouts typically are not very comfortable, and they're not appropriate for everyone. We would perform our set of whatever exercise we're doing, and then we would release the pressure, and then that blood would be able to get in and out, and we would have this, again, this huge response from training that way. Now, it's been shown, the really cool thing with this is we can create pretty significant muscle hypertrophy with very low intensities. So around 30% is effective. Normally 30% of your 1 rep max is too low of an intensity to create much of a response in muscle size. But because of the blood flow restriction, we're able to do so. And this is why a lot of researchers have used this with individuals that have maybe joint issues, arthritis, where they can't really load very much, but they are losing muscle mass, so they use this style of training. In a laboratory, it's a lot easier to set up when you have this equipment to know exactly how much pressure you're putting in there. Just using like bands and straps to kind of guess, you might get it, but it's not as accurate and can be a little bit more of a challenge to make sure you have the right amount of pressure on there. So using things like increasing time under tension with no pause training and 1.5 rep style training, I think it's just a better option for most people. We don't have to worry about pressure straps or cutting off circulation or anything like that. All we're going to do is not allow the muscle to relax. So when a muscle is contracted and stays contracted, it essentially creates that hypoxic environment. It's hard to get blood to flow into the muscle when it's always contracted. It's essentially pushing the blood out. And then when you relax the muscle, it's like a sponge, and it's going to let that blood get in there. And then when you contract, it's pushing things out again. But if you never let it relax, it's much more difficult for the blood to get there. And this is why, if you've ever done training where holding an isometric contraction for a long period of time, like we talked about, or just not resting and really pushing through an exercise, it burns and burns and burns because of these things. So these are a little bit safer and not worrying about restricting blood flow and still getting very similar results. So the video on the left here, this is 1.5 rep training. So we're going to use a split squat as our example. So we go all the way down, halfway up, all the way down, all the way up. And we have no breaks at the top or the bottom. So it's a nice smooth movement up and down. So every rep takes a lot longer than if I were to just go down and up. So it's a great way to increase time under tension, and we can do it with pretty much any exercise out there to create more time under tension. Also, over here on the right, we're doing no pause push-ups. So essentially what this means is we're not going to do full range of motion. So I know typically we want full range. We want to take the joints to full range of full range of motion and train the muscles that way. But there is a benefit to coming just short of full range of motion because it means you can't rest. The muscles are always engaged, and again, we can create that similar hypoxic environment. So you can see on these push-ups, I'm not quite pressing all the way up. So we're going to create more tension for longer, and we'll complete our set that way. So it's not something we want to do this all the time, but it is a great way to mix up your training and increase that metabolic stress. Okay, and then the third way to maximize hypertrophy is with muscle damage. And like I said, I think this is where most people are familiar. So it's typically done with eccentric type training. That has just been shown to be very beneficial for increasing muscle size, right? We damage that muscle, it grows bigger and stronger. So we can see in the image here, we have the control. So the muscle fibers, you see the sarcomeres nice and lined up. Everything looks nice, neat, and organized. When you do some eccentric training and that muscle is damaged, it just looks like everything was completely disrupted. Then the body will signal this and will respond by repairing this and, again, creating bigger, stronger muscles. So with eccentrics, we have a greater neural adaptation. We are stronger in the eccentrics. We can load up that movement a little bit more, and we can increase the force output. We are also going to increase the amount of stress per motor unit. Again, we can handle much more weight with this. And it preferentially recruits fast twitch muscle fibers, which is harder to do. We have to lift heavier loads in order to get those fast twitch fibers to engage. And then obviously one of the main benefit is we're going to increase that muscle microtrauma, so it signals the response to grow muscle. So there's a lot of different ways we can focus on that eccentric type training. So we can do heavy eccentrics. So with heavy eccentric training, like I said, we can handle more weight, but you need help if you're going to do this. So you might do kind of the traditional spotter assist. So if I'm doing my heavy bench press, I'm doing a weight that I would have a really hard time getting up on my own, but I could get it down. So we lower it down under control, and then a spotter helps us get it back up, and then repeat that way. If you don't have a spotter, we can try some cheat reps. I have a couple of videos to show you what I mean by that. We essentially cheat on the concentric so we can focus on the heavy eccentric. We can do overspeed eccentrics, which is basically speeding up the eccentric motion. And we can also do super slow eccentrics, where we can just increase that tension as we lower down. So we'll talk about a few examples of each. So here's that cheat rep. So we use a heavy resistance. On the left here, we're going to do a push press with an eccentric lowering. So I'm using a kettlebell here, but you can use a dumbbell, whatever it might be. You just want a weight that you really couldn't press overhead too easily. Maybe you might be able to get a rep or two, but not much more than that. So in order to get it up, we have to do a push press. So we use the legs to get it up, and then we eccentrically lower it back down. And then we cheat to get it up there, eccentrically lower it down. So this is a great way to incorporate more of those heavy eccentrics when maybe you don't have a spotter. So just think of where you can cheat to get it through the concentric and then lower on the eccentric. Another example might be pull-ups. So here I'm going to do jumping pull-ups. So I'm going to jump to get up, and then I'm going to really focus on the eccentrics to get back down. And then cheat to get back up there. Nice and slow lowering down. So these are just a couple examples of how we can do cheat reps to load those eccentrics. All right, and then overspeed eccentrics. This bands just tend to work the best here. So if we look at this picture here with using the heavy resistance bands on the barbell and to do squats, for example, when we're standing up, those bands are fully stretched and they're trying to pull you down the whole time. So it's going to pull you down much faster than you typically are used to. So you have to learn how to control that speed, control that deceleration. And then the goal is for a rapid switch between phases. So that's from eccentric to concentric as fast as you can. So we just squat down under control and then immediately come back up. So here's a video for a bench press. So we just have the band wrapped on the barbell and then underneath the bench. And that band is going to lower us down, and then I'm going to try and pop it up as fast as I can. Right? So yes, you can load that bar up to make it a little bit more challenging, but just so you can see that idea of the band speeding up the eccentric motion and then switching as fast as you can into that concentric. Or we can slow down. Super slow heavy eccentrics, not super slow training. So sometimes you've seen that method where it's super slow eccentric, super slow concentric, very, very slow movement. That's not what we're talking about here. We're really just focusing on the super slow eccentric motion and then more of an explosive concentric. So we still have some quick movement there, but great for hypertrophy, great also for building tendon strength. So yield slowly, 4 to 14 seconds. 14 seconds is a long time. Imagine taking 14 seconds to do a push-up. So that essentially is going to take you 30 seconds to do 2 reps. So keep that in mind. The slower the eccentric phase, the less reps you're probably going to do. Eccentrics in general, I should have mentioned earlier, which you probably already know, lead to big time soreness. So you're only doing these types of training drills, any of these eccentric drills, maybe once a week. You need proper recovery. If you remember that picture of the muscle damage we created with eccentrics, that takes time to heal. And if we're not careful, we keep damaging the muscle and then we might go into a status of overtraining. Okay, so we lower slowly, we lift explosively. And we're typically going to use workloads of approximately 60 to 85% of our 1 rep max, so pretty heavy resistance here. So in this video, I'm going to show just using bands. So if push-ups are a challenge, that might be your heavy loading. I'm going to add the bands to make it even heavier. So nice and slow. It's going to take me a few seconds to get down, and then we explode back up. And then very slow, focusing on that eccentric, pushing back up. So some of these are similar, but just different ways that we can really stress that eccentric style training there. Okay, to finish out this webinar, I want to talk about just a few other training methods that I think are just good to know about if you haven't seen them before, or just finding ways to incorporate them into your training. Now, again, depending on the type of periodization, some of these are going to be easy to implement. Some you may not be able to, depending on the type of block that you're in. So, but I at least want to go over them so you have some ideas on, again, how do we create some variety? How do we change it up a little bit? How are we kind of covering all of our bases with training? So we're going to talk about velocity-based training, density training, complex training, and hybrid training. So velocity-based training has become a very popular term, and it can mean a few different things, but essentially we're looking at power. Now we have our definition of power here is force times acceleration. So we can train power in different ways. We can increase the force and just move as quickly as we can. So think like a barbell clean. We have a lot of force. We are going to move it as quickly as we can, but because it's such a heavy load, if it is like a heavy barbell clean, it doesn't move as fast as, say, it was like a med ball throw. Me throwing a 4-pound med ball, it may not have much force to it, but I'm really focusing on the acceleration. And really, both of these are great ways to incorporate velocity-based training. So you'll have to use what you're comfortable with, what your clients are comfortable with. If they're not comfortable doing heavy, barbell cleans, you might be focusing more on the lighter force, higher acceleration type training. That could be plyometrics, that could be med ball throws, any of those type of variations. And you can see the chart here with the different types of strength and the speed on how fast a weight or a ball or your body might be moving, if it's absolute strength and kind of moving along there. So starting with very high force and then going towards more high velocity, higher speeds. So again, it just depends, and we want to kind of be as much covering this curve as much as possible and not just staying in one area there. Now, the way technology is, there are a lot of new tools out there that you can use to help you with this, that you can put on a bar or even inside medicine balls to see how fast somebody is moving something, so you can really determine what their power is. If you don't want, you don't care that much about power, then it's just all about moving quickly and just trying to move the bar as fast as you can, throw the ball, jump as high as you can, whatever it might be. But power training, regardless of your population, is going to have a lot of carryover into functional activities and sports, regardless of your age. If you're 80 years old, 20 years old, some type of velocity-based training is going to be an important piece to their program. Now, again, if they're in sports and it's a power sport, they need to sprint and jump and all those things, it's going to be a much bigger piece. But if you're just looking to increase functional activities, power-based training is going to come in handy. And one of the big things is recruiting those higher threshold motor units. I know I've talked a lot about the motor units, but those fast twitch muscle fibers. So we know how important and how critical they're going to be in sporting events, but everyday population, these are going to be important for max strength and power. If I have an older population that I'm working with, it's just as important because we know what muscle fibers are going to atrophy first. It's the ones you're not using. And when you picture most of our older population and how they move, it's not typically fast. They're relying on those lower threshold motor units, the slower twitch fibers. So again, use it or lose it. If we're never recruiting those higher threshold motor units, we won't need them. So we're going to start to get rid of them. And then when I need them, like if I trip and I'm about to fall, I'm not going to be able to react very quickly, move very quickly to try and either break my fall or hold on to something or react in some way. So it's going to be important that we include this with any type of training program. So I've already talked a couple examples. So plyometrics come in handy. So if they can jump and things like that, that is going to be a great way to incorporate velocity-based training. Med ball throws to get some upper body movement in there. Olympic lifting, like I said, obviously you need to have that background if you're going to be teaching things like that. And then band training. I think bands are great tools because we can just move very quickly with them. You could pull them as fast as you want. You could push them as fast as you want. You can use them for plyometrics and other things, but we can move very quickly with bands and not have to worry about catching a weight or weights falling or anything like that. So here's just a video of like med ball throws, for example. So here's a great velocity-based training example with our med ball rotational throw. That is a light resistance, so it's not very heavy. So what we're focusing on is the acceleration piece. And a lot of people mistake that if I'm going to throw a med ball, it needs to be as heavy as possible. But we know the heavier that ball gets, the slower it actually moves. So we need to find weights that people can actually move very quickly with. So a lot of times I just listen to, if I'm going to do a med ball throw against the wall like we see here, I'm just going to listen and see how loud it is. If it's a really loud throw, I know that they're throwing it very powerfully. If it's a kind of a weak sound, then I know we probably picked too heavy of a weight. They need to pick something a little bit lighter so they can really smash it into the wall. But that's the key here, is that intent to move quickly. All right, and like I mentioned, plyometrics, shock training is going to be a great way to, again, improve reactive strength, activating more motor units, improve muscle strength, all the good things that we've been talking about. So getting clients jumping, and that can be simple things like jumping jacks, anything to just create that shock, that bounce effect is going to be helpful for training this, for this type of training. Now with plyometrics, obviously there comes in risk when we're going to be jumping and things like that. And we need to make sure that their body can handle something like that. So I always recommend starting with landing drills first. This might be part of your warm-up, or this might be the first phase of training for somebody if they've never done really any serious plyometric training before. We're just going to teach them how to land. And I know it might sound silly, but this is a great way to prepare the body. It's essentially a form of eccentric training. We're going to step off of a platform, a low box like you see here, and we're just going to teach them how to land. It's almost like a gymnast trying to stick the landing, and that's all they're going to do. So we're just going to instruct them to step off and stick the landing. So they're not jumping yet, they're just stepping down and learning how to land softly. Should be super quiet so we don't really hear any noise as they hit the ground, and they just kind of finish in that squat position. So they're ready to jump, but we just don't quite have them jump yet. So once they've mastered that, of course, there's hundreds and hundreds of plyometric drills that we can do, hopping, bounding, single leg, double leg, hurdle jumps, box jumps, all these different things. Depth jumps have been proven to be incredibly effective. They are higher demand, and that's why it's so important to build up to something like this so the muscles, the joint, the connective tissue are all ready for something like this. So it basically looks like the drill you just saw, but now we're trying to be as explosive as possible. We're trying to reduce the amount of time on the ground. We want to be reactive and bouncy. So it's almost like jumping off a trampoline. So as soon as you hit the floor, you're trying to spring back up. So height of the step, definitely want to start low and then work your way up, even under 16 inches. The shorter the box, the less time you have to fall and the more you have to react. So it makes it a little bit trickier, but it's less impact. So you just have to kind of see what would be the best fit for your clients. Again, since it is high impact, we don't want to be doing this all year. We'll do blocks of this throughout the year so they are not going to be overtraining and hurting themselves. So here we have the depth jump where we're going to just step off again, immediately hit the ground, and then spring up as high as we can. So again, working on going from eccentric to concentric as fast as we can. Okay, moving on to our next one, we're going to talk about density training. So compacting your workouts. So in and out, these are just efficient workouts where we're really going to be focusing on that metabolic stress. We're not going to allow for complete recovery. We want maximum intensity and minimum time. Since they'll be shorter, we're not eliminating that catabolic effect, right? It's exercise, it's breaking down there, but we're not working out for hours and hours, so we're going to limit excessive catabolism. Increasing stamina because we're not allowing for full recovery. That's a kind of a side benefit of doing this. And we have some great stimulation of some anabolic hormones like growth hormone. So when we do these short bursts, low rest exercise, we know that we will have a buildup of lactic acid. As lactic acid builds up and we can no longer handle that much, it's going to it's going to keep growing in the blood, and that's a signal to release growth hormone, among other things. So we're going to have this growth hormone boost with these quick type workouts. So how do we incorporate density training? Timed works very well because you kind of stick to the clock. You start off with a pre-programmed rest intervals, so it's like intervals. You know how long you're going to work, how long you're going to rest, and we just stick to that. And then as they get better and better, we shorten that rest. So it might start off with 60-second rest, then 45, then 30. Supersets work great here. So we do maybe a set of squats and then a set of rows, rest for 60 seconds, and then go, and then we progress from there. So it's trying to get as much work in as little time as possible. This is kind of one of my favorites, escalating density training. It's basically a superset, but what we're trying to do is to do, like I've been talking about, do as much work in the shortest amount of time. So it's a great way to increase training density, a great way to increase total body lactic acid buildup, especially if you're doing something like an upper body, lower body superset. So how it works is you basically set a timer for a given time. I recommend around 5 minutes to start, and then you can build up from there, 10, 15 minutes. And you select 2 exercises, and then you just say, okay, go. You have 5 minutes. You're going to do 10 reps of each, and we're going to do this as many sets as you can do until time runs out. So in the beginning, you can recommend more rest, just so they kind of get the hang of it. They do a set, they recover a little bit, they move to, if they're doing swings and push-ups, for example, like we see here, they do a set of swings, they allow recovery, then they go into their push-ups, a little bit of recovery, and just back and forth. Or it's just kind of, you rest when you need it. If you don't need it, you keep going. So we take away that full rest and we just have them push through. So it's 10 swings, 10 push-ups, 10 swings, and they just keep going and do as many sets as they can there. Okay, moving on to complex training, we're going to talk a few different things here. Traditionally, how we've seen complex training, it's alternating a high load resistance exercise with a low load shock training exercise like a plyometric or a med ball throw, for example. This has been popular for many years, especially in more strength-based and power-based sports. A great way to improve speed, strength, and explosiveness. We get that recruiting of our fast twitch muscle fibers. So it could be something like a set of heavy barbell squats right into box jumps or something like that. So you will do two movements that use similar movement patterns or muscles. So a squat and then a squat jump, a deadlift and then a kettlebell swing, push up or bench press, and then a med ball chest throw. So we're just alternating between a heavy resistance and then a light fast movement. So again, just kind of a traditional example here. This would be a full rest superset. So this is going to take a lot more time. We'll do some type of core exercise. And by core, we don't mean like abdominal exercise, more like a big movement. Rest for a few minutes. We do the shock exercise, rest for a few minutes, and then we repeat that for 2 to 5 times. So you can see that's going to take a while. You're not going to get through too many exercises if we're doing that. Here, it's just a slight variation. We remove that middle rest. So we'll do our core exercise. So maybe we're going to do our squats. Then we immediately go into our box jumps, and then we rest for a couple minutes and repeat. So you can see it is a long rest period because we want heavy lifts, maximal effort to get the most out of this. All right, and then a similar style of training, training complexes. This is a little bit different where now we're talking about like circuit style of training with no rest. And we typically are using one implement, one weight, one piece of equipment. So a barbell, a kettlebell, a dumbbell, a med ball, whatever it is, and we do a circuit with that one piece. This is a great way to train both conditioning and strength at the same time. And we get that metabolic response as well because we're doing more endurance-based training. We're just using loading to do it. So I have a couple examples. We have multiple reps and single rep examples. So kettlebells work great. A lot of the kettlebell workouts you see are essentially forms of complexes. So basically we pick a group of exercises, could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even 10. And we go through multiple reps of each without stopping, without putting the weight down. So here might be an example of a kettlebell complex. So I'm going to start with single arm kettlebell swings. So we'll go through a given number of reps. So 3, 4, 5, 6 reps. Then I'm going to go right into a single arm racked squat. And we'll go through our reps here. Again, so I might do 5 swings, 5 squats, and then we're going to go right into an overhead press. So we have to pick a weight that we know we can do all of the different exercises, but this is a great way to put together a complex. We just pick exercises that we can flow right into each other, and then we can allow a rest there, or we can say you go right into the other arm and complete the other side. So that would be kind of a typical complex. We pick an exercise, a few exercises with one piece of equipment and put together a circuit. If you're interested in learning more about complexes, we do a complex course. We have an exercise complex made simple DVD that's available on the Exercise Etc. website as well. And we have a whole bunch of complexes in there. Here's an example using a sandbag of a single rep complex. So it's same idea. We're going to do a few different exercises, but we're only going to do 1 rep of each. And then we move on to the next exercise. And then we'll repeat. So let's just go right to our example. So here, we're going to go sandbag, lateral lunge, right to a clean, to a reverse lunge, to a rotational press. All right, so we have a lot of parts there. And then we go to the other side, 1 lunge, 1 clean, 1 lunge, 1 press. So that was 1 rep per side. So now we're on rep number 2 to our press. And the other side, flip it up, clean, lunge, right to our press. So same idea. I could have done the last example where we do 1 swing, 1 squat, 1 press, and then the other arm, one clean or 1 swing, 1 squat, 1 press. So you just pick one rep of each exercise, and they just kind of flow through that way. So again, both great options Definitely more advanced, so be sure they're ready for something like that. So complex training, whichever type we're talking about, they're not for beginners. They need to master these different movements, and they have to have good enough endurance to do that. Hybrid training as well, which we're going to get into in a minute. So these are not something, again, this is why periodization is so important. We can plan these things out. We're not going to be doing, 6 months of hybrid or complex training or any of these higher, more advanced types of training. We're going to go through our different waves of intensity and then valleys of recovery. So the last one we're going to talk about are hybrid training systems. So this is a little bit like that idea of undulating periodization, where we're going to do a little bit of everything. So we're going to do some heavy lifts for strength, but we're also going to do some fast lifts for power. We're going to do some medium rep sets for muscle growth, and we'll do some high rep sets for conditioning and endurance. So we get a little bit of everything. Now, just understand, you're not going to get max results in any one area. This is not the best way to get as strong as possible, to get as big as possible, to have the best endurance or whatever it might be. This is more for the person that wants to get as best as they can in each one of these. So again, you just have to look at what the client's goals are and if this makes sense to do with them. So we might see our program written out like this. This might be a day. We have a power series, so we might do something like box jumps, and then we have a strength series, and we're going to do 5x5 squats. Then we might do a few exercises for more hypertrophy-based pull-ups and an overhead press. We hit that 3 sets of 10 area, and then we finish up with endurance, and we're going to be doing push-ups and leg lifts 2 times 25 reps each. So you can see there's not one specific goal in the whole workout. We're doing little bits of everything. But again, it's not random. These are all planned and part of the overall program. Okay, and then just a reminder, don't forget about those recovery weeks. So build these in. You might have 4 weeks on, 1 week off. And when I say 1 week off, I don't mean nothing. It's just not a week to try and break records. We can still work out. We're just not training to failure. We're just not trying to push anything there. You can use RPE, rep RPE, as a way to determine how hard you should be going. I kind of talked about this earlier. This chart here kind of gives you an idea of where they're at. So if maybe they could have done, if I kind of pick in the middle here, you could have done maybe 3 more reps. If that's what you agree with, you're at about a 7.5. So it just kind of gives us, a good question to ask. How many more reps do you think you could have gotten? And they were like, I definitely could have gotten 1 more rep, but that would be it. Okay, we're at about a 9. And if they were like, that was it, I couldn't have done a single effort, we're at a 10 now. So as I was mentioning, when I start a new program, I like to do week 1 we're at like a 7.5 or 8. Week 2, we're at like an 8 to an 8.5. Week 3, we're at like a 9, 9.5. And then week 4, we're striving for 10s. And then when we start our next phase, now we're going to go back to that 7.5. So we're going to leave a few reps in the tank. We're not going to train to failure every single week. Kind of 1 week of that cycle is where we're trying to push and break all of our PRs. All right, so to finish up, keep it simple. I hope I at least gave you some clarity. The big thing is have a system, have an idea how you're going to put all of this stuff together. Having any system is better than no system at all. So what I strongly recommend is create templates. Look at how long you typically train clients for. Say on average you work with clients for 6 months or a year, so start with that. So know, okay, if I have a 6-month goal, here's how I want to approach it. So if you think linear is the way to go, we can create a linear program. If you think undulating would be the better option, you can create undulating. You can have a program for beginners, a program for more advanced. So maybe your beginners go more with your linear style periodization, and maybe your advanced exercisers go more undulating, and then you can kind of combine it. And that's, personally, that's how I like to set it up. My beginners, we start with a linear approach and they work into an undulating, right? Because I know in the beginning, I just want consistency. I just want to get them rolling. And we go through a few phases, and once they get through that, now we're going to go into our undulating and create a little bit more variety. So figure out those templates. It does take more time up front, but it's going to save you a ton of time in the end. keep a journal, keep notes, make sure you can see how they're feeling, encourage them to keep track some of the things like we talked about. And then only change when you're not seeing the same progress anymore. So like I said in the beginning, you're going to stick with the same program for a long period of time. As they get more advanced, that's when you're going to create a little bit more variety there. Okay, so we've made it to the end of the webinar. First of all, thank you so much for sticking around. I really hope you got a lot out of this. Rewatch this. I know it was a ton of information we went through, but I just wanted to give you some ideas on how you can start developing a system to create your programs for yourself and for your clients. So again, now that you've completed the webinar, go to the website, follow the instructions here, get your certificate. Remember, make sure you pick the correct title, answer the quiz. The quiz questions are going to be based off of the handout that you received, and you'll fill out the evaluation, and then you'll be able to instantly get your certificate. And don't forget, make sure that you complete this webinar and print it by December 31st of this year, the year that you purchased the program. If you wait too long, there might be an issue getting your credit, so please don't hesitate there. All right, well, that's it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope that we see you again on a future Exercise Etc. webinar or at one of our live courses.